Hey, greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Radical Workplace. I am I am still your host, Shale Risman here from Pace Technical, and I am joined today, as always, by my beloved co-host, Mel Duncan. Hi, Mel.
Hi, everybody.
And we are here today to have a discussion with someone we have already spoken with, and that is Dr. Donna Ferguson from CAMH. Hi, Dr. Ferguson. Welcome back.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I think the certainly the last time we did a webinar together, we were just talking about this. It was really successful. There was a ton of people listening. I think, Mel, correct me if I'm wrong, it was one of our most watched ones.
Of our most watched, most engaged with, and people kept giving us compliments and kept asking for resources during and after. So it was really, really successful, and we're so happy to have you back.
Thank you. It was
most
wonderful.
Definitely. Now we have, the theme of the show, obviously, as always, is we're talking to people who are involved with organizations who take radical steps and step outside of the box as far as how they deal with their employee engagement or how they deal with the product that they deliver. And we decided that talking to CAMH as an organization, as a very unique organization globally, frankly. As a mental health advocate, I'm in and out of the United States a lot, and obviously the kind of environment there is a whole lot different than how we deal with it, needless to say. But CAMH is kind of stands alone in its aggressive proaction in trying to eliminate not only the disease itself, but also the stigma. So of course I had this whole thing, planned, and we were going to have this discussion about this. But recently this week, I lost a very, very close and dear friend who took his own life. He was a camp director. And the only reason that I'm not mentioning his name is because I haven't had a discussion with his wife about this, and but she is very open to, and he was a very open and effusive person when it came to this. This is not an easy, hard thing for anyone to Google if they want to check it out. But he was camp director in the Ontario Camping Association, and was beloved. I mean, beloved was a complete understatement. Yeah, of this man. He profoundly touched thousands and thousands of lives over 35 years of being a camper and a staff member at this camp, and finally being a co-director there. And just the overwhelming sense of grief and loss when it came to this unbelievable human being is really bubbling to the surface for us. So of course we have to change. I talked to Dr. Ferguson about this yesterday. We have to change what we're going to address here today, because the thing that I'm hearing the most from people who thankfully have not necessarily been touched or think they haven't been touched by mental illness is that they're applying rational thought to an irrational concept. The asking of the questions of why did he do it? He seemed to be so happy all the time. He was completely bent on being kind to other people, and had his life built around that as a camp director. And people can't get their heads wrapped around what happened. And I think that that's something that we really it's the whole rational to irrational thought thing that I think we need to address, as well as he has left behind him thousands of people in tangible grief. And I know that is post-traumatic stress syndrome is something, Dr. Ferguson, that you deal with on a regular basis with your practice. And that is something I think that, because it's a unique situation that we have to address with how we're going to deal with all of these people from the ages of 7 to 70, frankly, who have dealt with this person. So let's start here. I've never kept it a secret that my own brother suffered from clinical depression and anxieties. This goes back into the mid 90s and took his own life in January of 1996. And this is before a lot of changes happened in the system. So he didn't have nearly the opportunities to be able to chase a cure. He did, for lack of a better terms, electroshock therapy, which worked for him on several occasions, but it only lasted a very short amount of time. He was medicated. He was in med school, so he was completely aware of his disease. He was completely aware of what needed to be treated, but there wasn't a lot. And frankly, there was a massive stigma, way more than there is now, around suicide. And what this has done for me personally is that it's brought it all back, needless to say, because this was a very close friend of mine, and I'm face to face with this once again, and it just seems like more of the same to me. But what Carrie, my brother, told me is when he was trying to explain this disease and explain, he's someone who attempted many times to take his own life, and the way he explained it was akin to cancer. And that most people, and this is back in 1996 when really nobody was talking about it like this, that people fight cancer. Everybody who gets cancer fights it. Some people live and some don't. And suicide in this case is for lack of a better term, the natural progression of the disease, or it is a way that the disease ends. And this is just from a guy who was in the middle of that. So was he, Dr. Ferguson, does that make sense to you? Was he in tune at that point with making that analogy, or was he completely off base?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've never actually heard the analogy put in that way, but as I'm listening to you, it makes a lot of sense. And I liken that to a chronic illness, right? Something that sort of erodes over time. And I think too, in that regard, with suicidality, especially, when we look at risk factors around suicide, the more times that someone attempts suicide is the more likely they will complete suicide. And so that would go in line with what he's saying as well, is that, there were multiple attempts, and then usually people succeed at some point. That's the ultimate end, and they know that.
And when you say they know that, the victim, the
individual,
the individual knows it.
Yeah, in a lot of ways they do. They feel like they will succumb to that. There are exceptions. There are people who, for whatever reason, are able to find a way out of it. But again, that is a very high risk factor when people attempt at least once or more than once. Then we look out.
Yeah, and as a clinician yourself, I was talking to another psychiatrist who had mentioned to me that, he does get, because the nature of his work is that he gets calls from the coroner and has to have these discussions and try and track down his patients. And he says that 25 years later, he is still shocked at the people who complete.
Yes.
Is that something that you have seen as well, or?
Definitely. I mean, yeah. I think that sometimes we think we know and we understand, and even when we've been in this business for a long time, we still, we're still surprised at times when we see that people would have completed suicide when we thought they were sort of on the other end. They were kind of doing better. They seemed like they were, calmer, happier, and then they'll complete. And so that's why when you say the, rational thought around this topic is challenging. We're trying to make sense of something that doesn't always make sense. And then we're trying to understand why somebody would do something. And sometimes people get angry because, like, why would you do that? Why would you hurt us? What, and there isn't any intention to do that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where the kind of people, where we're seeing a lot of people who haven't necessarily had their, fortunately haven't had their hands dirty in mental illness, yeah. Are not like, they're reaching out and going, why? Yeah. He had everything going for him. How did I not see this coming? Right. How did I not know about this? I watched the webinars. I read the books. I'm following every single thing that I'm being told about trying to make sure that people are getting the right help.
Right.
What do you do when somebody is getting the right help? And he was.
Yes, I believe that.
Yeah, he was. And you know, he was you know, seeing therapists, and he was talking out loud to people, me being one of them. He sought out people who had a lot, you know, mental health issues,
Mhm.
so that there was some commiseration there. But very few of us could have, certainly the minute, you know, that one singular moment
Yeah.
that you make the decision, it's not like anyone is going to be there to stop them. Right.
And they don't want someone there to stop them. So
Right.
this is where things can get tricky, even as mental health professionals. And I've walked a lot of people through this you know, this land of suicidality, whether, you know, at different levels of risk.
Mm-hmm.
And people will say, you know, mental health professionals sometimes will feel confident with someone signing a contract, a suicide contract, and saying, oh, we're good. They signed a contract. They're not going to complete suicide. We're good. You know, this is why places like CAMH don't really believe in suicide contracts, because people will hold on to that. Clinicians will hold on to that
Mm-hmm.
and think, oh, okay, we're good. And then someone goes off and kills themselves and they don't understand why. Well, they promised. They're not going to tell you if they're going to do it. They don't want you to reach out. And that's what people don't understand. They won't necessarily reach out for you to act so that you can stop them. If they want to complete it, they'll go ahead and do that.
And there's no way to really see when they. I had another friend who did an amazing article for Clio magazine, an online magazine, who wrote about this and started. You know, he's someone who's also struggled with mental illness. You can Google him, Ryan Wagner. He did a great article on this, and he said that you don't know that you're on the bottom rung until you're there. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually speaks a lot to this, is that, right, you know, he that's what happens, and he's there, and he's, you know, almost imperatively, this is about my brother as well, almost imperatively you're by yourself and you're alone when you die. And that isn't necessarily the case when it comes to other deadly diseases. People are surrounded by their family. Right. And this makes it a huge amount different, because it's a choice. And whether it's a rational or an irrational choice, this is where people are getting are really frustrated and frankly angry. And I think it's important that, Dr. Ferguson, that you actually, and you've been saying this, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I do have a lot of thoughts on this, is that what do you say to people who are spending all of their time trying to rationalize this in some way?
I say stop doing that, because you can't. You just can't. You know, again, being in this business for a long time, working with people, and I'm not trying to, like, I'd like us to have a real conversation about this, but that in no way means that, you know, you know, not suicide, not today, you know, that whole big campaign that CAMH has been doing, prevention, monitoring, ensuring that, you know, people who are considering it don't consider it and don't follow through. I think all of that is great, and I think we should continue to do that, because I do think that we do save lives. But I do think that inevitably there will be people that will continue to take their own lives, regardless of the interventions.
Sure. Right. And I think that's where this is where we have to deal with today. Right. Is what happens when you walk into a workplace and you found out that a colleague has taken their own life, and that you feel that didn't know, that you had no idea, and that somehow you think you could have made this different. So what do you say to people within a workplace, how to deal with this collectively, even? Like, what do you suggest?
Well, I suggest, first of all, that we mourn the individual that was our colleague and friend, or whoever they were to us, and that we take the time to grieve and mourn that death, because this is a death. Now, how this person died is obviously what people are struggling with. You know, again, they didn't die of cancer, which would feel it's hard, but you can accept that, because there wasn't anything you could do to help or to reach out. But I think it's important to let people know that, you know, you could not have done anything differently to save this individual's life in that moment, if they were determined to do it. And I understand that now. I don't think I understood that back in the day when I was a green clinician, but in seeing people die around me by suicide, in having colleagues who've lost clients as well, even sometimes losing clients and not really sure whether or not it was suicide, or not. Inevitably, you're kind of left sort of wondering what happened. The person seemed well when they left your office, and the next thing you know, they passed away in their sleep, and only autopsy and time can tell how they passed away. So all of these things, when you experience all of these things, and I've actually made it a point in my clinic over the years to do a lot of work on suicide risk and putting together orientations for the students that come in and supervisees, so they understand how to look for risk, assess for risk, look for different levels of risk, and be able to respond to imminent risk when we're able to respond to it. But at the end of the day, from a professional perspective, all of the risk and research in the world around suicidality, you cannot predict exactly when someone will kill themselves. That's what you have to tell people.
Right. And that's what my, again, the psychiatrist that I was speaking to matched you completely and said the same thing. He's like, It is, if we can't do it after 25 years experience, then nobody is able to do it. He says to me, you think that if I knew this exact moment that someone was going to kill themselves, that I wouldn't drive to their house and throw myself in front of them?
Of course.
Yeah. So, and it makes total sense. Now, in this environment where we're dealing with this person now is gone, what do you suggest to employers who are now faced with not only the hole in the business, that's a whole other issue that obviously you don't have to deal with, but how do you maintain the culture? How do you maintain the engagement and the team health after that?
I think people need to talk about it. I think you can't avoid it. I think you can't shy away from it. I think that team leaders really need to engage staff and the employees. And like you said, I think we need to try to eradicate the whole stigma around suicidality. People have historically felt that with suicide, if you even talk to someone about suicide, one, you're going to make them at risk for suicide, for thinking about it for themselves, or that
they've never thought about it before. Like you're giving them the thought. Yeah.
Exactly. And that obviously is a myth. We know that that's not true. And we know that it's better to open discussion around suicide. When I do my own assessments with clients, I just say, have you even thought, like, I'll say, oh, no, I haven't thought about suicide. And sometimes they don't want me to walk them over to the Emerge if I'm close by, because if there's imminent risk, I will do that.
Exactly.
Right. And two, they feel embarrassed in some ways that they would have thought about killing themselves. And so I make it really real. I say, I think we've all from time to time had thoughts, maybe I'm better off not being here. But that doesn't mean, we call that passive suicidality. It doesn't mean that you're actively thinking about jumping off a bridge or hanging yourself. But these are real conversations that we have to have and be open about it. And I find that when I do that, they're like, oh, wow, I normalize it. And when you normalize it.
Right. Yeah. And that is the word. We normalize it. The only way that we're going to get past this stigma is by normalizing it. And that is so true. But it seems easier said than done. Let's say you've got a person who is really struggling in this way. And you said yourself, and this is a question that I have, they are afraid of being admitted. And I've seen this. My brother was one of them, where that they don't want to go to the hospital, right? For whatever reason, they don't want to do it. Yeah. So how do you get these victims, for lack of a better term, into a place where that fear is taken away? Is it possible to do that? And is it just through what you're saying? Is it just through talking about it openly?
I've actually done that. I think I've experienced that over the years, even as a psychologist. Like, I've actually been involved in cases directly and supervised people. I actually walked in, a student called me in and said, look, I'm having trouble getting this guy. He feels like he's at imminent risk,
right?
But he doesn't want to go anywhere. He won't let us walk him. So I went in and I just said, look, sir. He's like, I don't want to go. Don't tell me. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And I said, I understand. I get that. But I said, and I explained that, we want to make sure that you feel comfortable and you're safe. And, they'll just look at you. If they don't feel you need to stay, they'll let you go. And they really will. But, they're the experts there. If we walk you over, we can stay with you while you're triaged, explain the process, And I think that helps to calm people down. And really 9 out of 10 times it's work to get them over there, and not feeling like you're pulling pulling teeth to get them over there, but you can get them over there and get them triaged and get them to wait. And often, many times they'll assess them and they'll feel comfortable to let them go. And the odd time they'll hold them. So I think it's just really laying it all out, explaining to them what the process is like, has often worked for me in my experience. It doesn't work every time. It doesn't work for all of us every time. And I think we just do our best. If we feel like someone's at imminent risk and we can't physically get them somewhere, then we have to think about other means. I mean, I hate to say call 911, but you want to make sure that someone's safe if they're at imminent risk in your space, at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, just extrapolating on that a little bit, it's obviously one thing for, like I said, like a doctor, a clinician like yourself, to be able to walk someone through that process. What happens when a colleague is faced with that? When it happens when someone is talking about it openly and starts talking openly to a colleague and saying, I fear for my safety.
I think if they're able to say, can I help you get help? If they're able to find resources to help them in the moment, if it feels like it's more of a chronic issue, because you can have chronic suicidality
absolutely,
and not be an imminent risk. And I think if it's chronic suicidality, I would really encourage that ongoing conversation and encourage supports to get help. Talk to your family doctor, if they need to help, take them there, all of those types of things. If it's imminent risk, as we've discussed before, and they're not safe to leave their colleague, I would really consider engaging their family, if they know family or friends. That's one way, is to get people involved if they're open to that. We like, as clinicians, we can actually breach someone's confidentiality in those situations where we feel like they're emergency situations.
Right.
But obviously, it's a different relationship with from colleague to colleague. So I think really trying to encourage the extra support, calling in reinforcements is helpful. And ultimately, if they really feel like they're unsafe, is really calling the police and actually getting immediate care.
So that's a gutsy thing to have to do, but
last resort.
That's a last resort, and that's listen. It is what it is, right? We have to. I guess for a couple of the questions that have come up, certainly over the past couple of days, are around what an employer specifically can do, or let's just take the employer out of it for a second. What can we do? You've got someone who is a victim, who doesn't want to, who is, has 50 years of the stigma implanted in their brain, and they're just not talking about it at all. And you can sit there as much as you want and scream from every social media platform, like you and I do,
right,
about talking and saying it out loud and talking to people, but they're embarrassed and they are still dealing with the stigma. How can you get somebody like that to start talking?
Well, that's tough, because you can't really, it's hard to be intrusive when someone doesn't want to talk. It's hard to push people to talk. I think it's always helpful if that person has at least one person that they can connect with, because that one person really can help to kind of penetrate that and continue to be there to offer support. I've heard of people saying, I was the only person that this person would talk to, and I was able to say I'm here. And even times they have one person, they'll still shut them out. But if they're able to say, hey, I'm here, and they can kind of try to get in that way, then they can continue to offer support. And then that would hopefully help to lead to resources if they were open to that. You have to have a trusting relationship
with somebody. So there has to be one person that you can trust to do this. And I guess for me, and I totally agree with you, because I have tried to be that person for a very long time for people. And it's only about, for me, I find that if I stay vulnerable and I stay transparent to people and talk about my own survivorship of suicide, that it promotes people, it promotes discussion, it promotes, and it goes back to the whole adage. It's a business adage. It has almost nothing to do with keeping track of your mental health. It's like, if you are a leader, you need to stay vulnerable and you need to stay transparent to your staff.
Exactly.
because you will get way better communication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's I'm glad that you brought that up. If I'm sitting here plastic talking to you and trying to elicit something from you that I won't give back, and it's not reciprocated, then why would you want to talk to me?
Right.
Right? You want to know that you can identify with me, that I can validate what you're going through, and that I can empathize, and I can have a general understanding. Otherwise, you're not going to engage anybody.
So what do you think now? Let's go back to this whole situation now where you've got this, not only the workplace itself, which is a whole other story, which, you know, what you said is going to be extraordinarily helpful to me and to them.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got a community now that is overwhelmed with grief, and a lot of children, a lot of young children who are just not understanding it. And I am frankly scared about what now you've got a bunch of parents who don't necessarily understand the importance of talking about this, who are just going to kind of push the cause under the rug and say he passed away in his sleep, or, you know what I mean? Like that part of it is insidious to me, and it crawls under my skin.
Yes.
And I'm not holding it against anybody. Well, maybe
No.
I am a little bit, but it's my own personal thing.
You're being real. You're being real here.
I'm being real.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm afraid is going to happen. And that's why, if you're a parent and this has happened to you now, this is an adult that has engaged your son or your daughter over a period of years, and they love him and they know him, and they have never, ever dealt with anything with mental illness before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Michael Shagru, president of Pace Technical. For over 20 years, we've been the leader in managed and co-managed IT for businesses in the GTA. If you want a proactive, process-driven approach to IT, we can help. Our complete care service eliminates issues and gets businesses the most out of their IT investments. We provide help desk support for quick response when you have issues, proactive maintenance to keep systems running, enterprise-grade security to keep you safe, and IT strategy for better business decisions. Book a free 20-minute IT gauge at pacetechnical.com today.
How are they supposed to explain that to their children?
Well, I think the problem is that everyone has their perception about suicide. And like you said, if people have that perception of the stigma and the embarrassment and the fear and all of those things that come with suicide, they don't want to talk about it. If they don't want to talk about it and deal with it themselves, they're definitely not going to do that with their children. And so I think there really needs to be a lot of education. I think we talked briefly, and I think at the training, some sort of form of having a professional come in and talk to people, parents alike, and to walk through some of the realities around mental health and mental illness, the realities around suicide, the realities around suicide risk, the realities around people taking their lives, and that this is a chronic issue that has eroded people over time from a mental health perspective, and that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's something that we need to open up and talk about, because if we don't, then it can become quite toxic, and then it'll lead to other people feeling like they can't talk about it and completing suicide later on.
Which is what we're, we know, certainly you and I know, and it's becoming more of an understanding now that talking about it reduces the rate of suicide.
Correct.
There is no getting around it.
There's no getting around it.
That is why we're, you're always thinking about that next person who goes through what I call that singular moment.
Mm-hmm.
You want to keep them away from that singular moment, whatever that moment may be. But let's break it down to basics. You're a parent, and you've never had any issue. You've never had really experience with mental health, but you were ready to talk about it openly with your son or daughter, who's 8 years old. How do you approach that? What do you say? How do you frame it?
It's a good question. I mean, there's obviously, it's really about that relationship between the parent and the child.
As always.
Yes, as always. An example might be, Billy, Mark meant a lot to us. We've known him for a long time. You've had a special relationship with him, as have I. It's really tragic that he took his own life, that he died, that he was suffering. He was suffering. And sometimes we suffer physically, right? Like we have, we get sick and we go to the hospital, and sometimes we suffer, emotionally in terms of our minds. Our minds are not working the way that they should. Sometimes we feel really down and we can't get out of that, or sometimes we get really panicky or anxious. And there's a lot of times that we have a lot of feelings that we just can't control and we just need help with. And sometimes it can get to the point where we don't know what else to do but to stop the pain and to end it. And that's why sometimes people do what they do when it comes to suicide. And really trying to break it down. I mean, it depends on the age of the child.
Of course.
I'm talking about probably somebody a little bit younger. You're talking to an adolescent. You're able to obviously say a bit more in terms of your language and how you articulate. But you want to be able to call it what it is, suicide. You want to talk about people, killing themselves or taking their lives. You want to be open about that language. I just, in terms of little kids, just trying to be able to break that language down, obviously, in something that they would understand.
See, that's great. I mean, that is a perfect example. I think that's going to be so useful to a lot of people out there who are, frankly, listening to this now and trying to struggling with how they're going to explain it to their children. I guess I'm going to take devil's advocate for a second, though. As a parent, wouldn't you be concerned that was going to scare your young child? Because they've obviously, up until this point, have had feelings of anxiety as well. Will they suddenly start going, oh my God, I have feelings of anxiety. I have the same thing that he does. What am I going to do? I'm scared now.
Look, I'm not going to lie. And some kids are more anxiety prone than others. My middle child is that child, no matter what you say to her. My other two are different. You can say anything to them, and they're different from a psychological perspective. So I do think it depends on the child. There's some anxiety sensitivity. I don't think that should stop you. I think that we still have to be real, because kids are going to find out about this one way or the other as they're growing, and it's better that they hear it from you as a parent.
So that's important. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I guess my next question on this is something that's come up, and it's something maybe that, again, it's on more of a personal level, in that 25 years ago, it was way different. Everyone called it committing suicide, and that was just the way it was.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of the word committing.
Me neither.
Okay.
You notice I didn't use it, right?
Yeah, and that's it. That's the point.
Yeah.
You'll never hear me use it either.
No.
Because I'm not sure. I guess someone once told me that the origin of it is that they're committing a mortal sin.
Correct.
In Catholicism,
that's exactly
right?
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, obviously this gentleman was Jewish. It really has nothing to do with it.
Right.
But also, it's the inherent meaning of that word is negative.
You did something wrong.
You're doing something wrong. Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we? I guess it's all education.
It's a lot of education. In fact, sometimes even people I supervise, I do a lot of supervision at CAMH and even in my private practice. And so whenever I see it in a report I'm reviewing, or I hear them talk about it, I actually correct them and I say completing. I say this is why I say completing suicide or completed suicide rather than committed.
Yeah.
And they go, okay. And I hear people now changing their language even just by doing that.
Well, it's just about letting people, it's education. It's just about letting people know, my mom for 25 years has just made suicide a verb and just say they suicided.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's it, because it was, there's a negative connotation to it. And
that makes sense.
It's just one of those things where it is the culmination of a disease.
Yes.
At the end of the day.
Yes.
Absolutely. I don't know what the percentage is. How many people complete who have, let's say, depression, general clinical depression? What's the percentage?
Oh boy, I don't have my stats with me, Shale.
Sorry. See, It's not my fault you have lack of preparation, Dr. Ferguson.
You got me on this spot.
No. I understand it's somewhere around 5% or something.
It is, and it's higher, I believe, of bipolar disorder.
Right.
So there are, and schizophrenia. So there are different disorders that actually bring that level, that percentage higher.
Right.
So depression, is up there, but bipolar and schizophrenia, I know is a bit higher. I think maybe 10 to 15, if I can remember.
That's high.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so there are, there are disorders that we need to, mental illness and disorders that we need to watch out for when it comes to suicidality, and pay attention to. And there are also age groups that we need to worry about, right? So there's groups between 15 and 24 that are at higher risk. In particular, what am I saying? Indigenous groups can be quite higher as well.
Wow.
Elderly, especially over 80 plus, are in a high suicidality group. Males complete suicide at a higher level than females.
What's the difference?
The means. So females might try to take their lives more often than males, but males will actually complete more.
Gotcha.
Is there a manner in which they complete more? Like, do you find males being more violent?
They're more, firearms, hangings, things like that. Where females are historically, taking medication and
like an overdose. Okay.
Right, exactly. Right. So that still stands in terms of statistics, as I understand, that males complete more than females.
Oh, that makes sense. All right, I know your time is really valuable, and I'm just trying to stay mindful of this. And I have a couple of questions that have come from our audience. One specific one that comes from Nat. I would like to know more about hormones and how they impact mental health, and specifically suicidal thoughts. I experienced this myself last year, and it was terrifying. We know about postpartum depression, so obviously there's a connection, but perimenopause is rarely in the discussion.
And PCOS, which is something that I found out recently, that I did not make the connection with my anxiety.
Yes.
So I want to know about it too.
So I don't have specific, this is not an area that I study.
No problem.
But I can tell you that from a personal perspective, as well as from what I've seen, there are definite connections with hormones and mental health and mental illness. Obviously, we know that when even when you're looking at something like PMS, there's actual there are now diagnoses around menstrual disorder.
Right.
So they're now making more of a connection between hormones and mental illness and issues around this in terms of how levels of depression, we know that postpartum can lead into depression as well. So it can last longer. So there are definite connections. In terms of rates, I don't know the statistics. It's not an area that I study, and there are people who study this.
No, so there's information out there. That's
there is definitely information out there.
And Mel, you were saying that is this you're experiencing this right now, because Mel, just for people who can't see, Mel is very pregnant.
Yes.
And
congratulations.
I
didn't know.
That's the glow. That's the glow, because she glows. That's the glow that you see. But you're saying, and this is fantastic because you're being open and public about it. Is this something that you're experiencing right now? Is this a
Yeah, I mean, PCOS has definitely affected my mood, my anxiety, the thoughts of maybe one day in life I could never have kids. What if that is just the reality of it? What are my options then? And, also being pregnant, you can't be on certain medications that would normally, make you a lovelier, nicer, more person. And it's a lot to deal with. So also learning about even prepartum depression that can affect you, and hormones are that's a whole other podcast episode, I feel.
It is.
Not for me. That's going to be you guys taking care of that one.
okay, it's for Mel and I.
It's for you guys, exactly.
It can definitely affect you because there's just so much you can't do,
Yeah.
when pregnant, but there are also other resources, like talking and having your psychologist there and doing therapy and maybe joining like peer groups of other mothers.
Absolutely.
Probably struggle with the exact same thing as you do. So there are ways that you could deal with it. It's just you have to find those resources. And sadly enough, what I'm seeing on, maybe some of those mommy blogs and just hearing from other women is that they don't know where to go or where to access resources. Women don't necessarily openly talk about it. And so they might be suffering in silence or just alone when they shouldn't have to.
I agree. I actually, it's prompted me to find some resources to send you guys. So I'm going to do that after.
That's good.
I will, because I actually, if I can divulge, I actually be transparent. I have PCOS as well, and I've lived with that. Common. And very common. A lot of us have it. We don't want to talk about it. Again, they told me years ago I would never have children. I have 3 beautiful, healthy children now. So. But it is, you can get to a place where you can get depressed. Hormones are all over the place. When you're trying to get pregnant, all of those types of things can really, interfere with your mental health as well as your physical health. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm glad you talked about it because it's not something that we discuss often.
Exactly.
I'm glad you talked about it too, Mel.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
glad you talked about it as well. It's good stuff. And no one has noticed that you're off your meds, so don't worry about that. It's all good.
Great.
He's wonderful.
They never notice when I'm off mine either. So, but this is, listen, Dr. Ferguson, this has been just fantastic. And I'm so happy in such a terrible time that I could have you here and kind of give us a real honest, and you've always been honest and you're always blunt and you always lay it out for everybody so there's no misunderstandings. And certainly for my answer, my brother went to CAMH in 1994 and was in and out of dealing with people at CAMH, and they were probably some of the only people who were helpful at the time, frankly.
Wow.
And because there was literally nothing. I mean, I remember specifically putting together the funeral and the rabbi asking me how I wanted him to say he died, like how he wanted to basically cover it up. And I'm like, you say it like it is, and he's like, I can't do that. I'm like, okay, then I'll do it. And
really,
me and my sister got up and we discussed it, and I mean, we're not heroes, but Carrie was. This had to be, he knew how important it was to talk out loud about it. And I guess that's my message. And it's certainly your message that every time you go public about this stuff, no matter how acute it is, there is a very good chance that you are saving somebody's life.
Absolutely.
Because you are talking about it. And the more people that talk about it and the less the stigma is out there.
Yes.
You are saving lives.
Absolutely. And that's, again, that, I just bring it back to CAMH's, not suicide, not today campaign. And one of the reasons that we have that campaign and this is, we need to open up that conversation, dialogue. We need to keep it open. We need to talk to each other. We need to talk to our kids. My kids, I talk to them about suicide all the time.
Yep.
And they understand. And I want them to. I'm really open with them about everything. I mean, even when they were younger.
You have to be. Like my kids, my kids are older. I have one that's going to be 23 this year, and another's going to be 20, and they say that my brother is the most alive dead person they've ever known. So these are the things that kind of we need to keep talking publicly. And I was just about to say, and I think it's a great place to end, is that CAMH was there for Carrie when he needed it, and CAMH is bigger than life now in our community. They are unique in their approach, and they are so proactive. And I'll say you guys are so proactive because you're a key to this, is that if you have any questions, do not hesitate to just go to the CAMH site, which I believe is camh.ca.
It is. Yeah. It is. And we have a lot of resources.
Right.
A lot.
Tons of resources. Tons. Like anything that I've ever had to look for, we looked for just did a search for bereavement or grief counseling for suicide in Muskoka, and I got a list of things coming up. You know what I mean? So this is the place. CAMH, if you're going to talk about a central place to deal with mental health, that is the place to go. If you're an employer that has questions about how to deal with it, that's where you go. If you're a person who is struggling, that's where you go. If you have children and you want to find out more about how to deal with this with the children, that's where you go. So camh.ca is always going to be the best place for everyone to go. Dr. Ferguson, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you.
And I refuse. I hold dear, and I guess the word I'm looking for is I reserve the right to beckon you onto this again at some point in the future.
I would love that. I would love that. I really enjoy.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy talking with you. I enjoy these interviews. I enjoy this openness, and I think if we all had this openness about mental health and suicidality and all of it, I think we would just do so much better, and that we could, my hope is that we can eradicate that stigma at some point. But I know that that's a work in progress.
It's a big hope, but we're getting, like, I look back on 25 years and we've moved the needle. So that's the important part, right? So,
absolutely.
All right, thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope all of you have a great week. Move forward. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, and good luck, Mel.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.